The snow fell heavily, blanketing the forest in white. On a desolate road at the edge of the woods, a van screeched to a halt. The door slammed open, and a handler dragged out a cage holding a frail bobcat and her two tiny cubs. The mother, Bella, pressed her body against her shivering cubs, her sharp eyes darting from the cage to the strange man. The cold wind howled around them as the man opened the cage and stepped back, muttering an apology before driving off. Bella and her cubs stood in the snow, abandoned and alone. The cold wind rattled the metal fencing of the shelter's outdoor pens, a haunting sound that echoed the desolation inside. Bella, the slender bobcat with a coat once lush and golden, huddled protectively over her two cubs, Ember and Frost. Their tiny bodies pressed into her sides for warmth, their faint cries lost in the noise of barking dogs and distant traffic. She licked Frost's ear soothingly, though her heart raced. Something was wrong. For weeks, the shelter had been her refuge. Found injured near the edge of a highway, she had been brought here by well-meaning rescuers who hoped to give her a chance at survival. But shelters are often burdened with too many animals and too few resources. Bella's presence was tolerated as long as she required minimal care, but now, with two cubs and a growing need for attention, her presence had become an unwelcome burden. The decision had been made quietly, behind closed doors. The staff had done what they could, they told themselves. She was wild, after all. Her cubs had slim chances of survival, and resources were better spent on animals with a real chance of adoption. Early one morning, before the shelter opened to the public, a handler entered Bella's enclosure. He carried a long pole with a looped noose at the end, his movements careful but resolute. Bella tensed, her sharp eyes narrowing as she positioned herself between the cubs and the intruder. Her growl was low and guttural, a warning that spoke of her desperation. The handler hesitated. He wasn't cruel. He didn't want to do this. But orders were orders. He tightened the noose and approached slowly. Bella backed into the corner, her claws scraping against the concrete floor as she snarled. Ember whimpered, and Frost let out a tiny cry, too weak to fully voice his fear. "I'm sorry," the man muttered under his breath as he managed to loop the noose around Bella's neck. She thrashed and yowled, her movements frantic as she tried to free herself, but the handler was quick and efficient. In minutes, Bella and her cubs were loaded into a van, their meager belongings, a blanket and an old metal bowl, left behind. The van ride was long and jarring, the cubs trembling with each bump in the road. Bella did her best to calm them, wrapping her body around theirs as the vehicle sped through unfamiliar territory. Her heart pounded as she tried to make sense of what was happening. She had trusted these humans once, and now they were abandoning her to an uncertain fate. The van eventually stopped at the edge of a dense forest, far from any town or road. The handler opened the back doors and pulled Bella's cage onto the muddy ground. He opened the latch and stepped back quickly, avoiding her wild gaze as she darted out, her cubs scrambling to follow. Bella didn't run at first. She stood frozen, her muscles coiled like springs, her sharp eyes scanning the unfamiliar landscape. The handler watched her for a moment, his expression heavy with guilt. He reached into his pocket, pulling out a handful of raw meat, which he tossed onto the ground. "I hope you make it," he said softly, before climbing back into the van and driving away. The roar of the engine faded into the distance, leaving Bella and her cubs alone in the forest. The air was thick with the smell of damp earth and decaying leaves, a stark contrast to the sterile scent of the shelter. Frost stumbled as he tried to follow Bella, his small paws sinking into the mud. Ember pressed against his mother's side, her wide eyes reflecting her confusion and fear. Bella sniffed the meat cautiously before nudging it toward her cubs. It wasn't much, but it would have to do. She waited until they had eaten, before taking a small bite herself. Hunger clawed at her insides, but she knew her cubs needed it more. As the day wore on, Bella led Ember and Frost deeper into the forest, her instincts guiding her towards safety. The terrain was rough, and the cubs struggled to keep up, their tiny bodies not yet equipped for the challenges of the wild. Bella paused often, allowing them to rest, her ears swiveling at every sound. By nightfall, she found a small hollow at the base of an old oak tree. It wasn't ideal, but it would provide shelter from the cold. She gathered moss and leaves to create a soft nest, then curled around her cubs, shielding them from the chill. Their soft breathing eventually slowed as they drifted to sleep, but Bella remained awake, her sharp eyes scanning the darkness. The betrayal of the shelter weighed heavily on her. She had trusted the humans to care for her, to provide a safe place for her cubs to grow, Instead, they had cast her out, leaving her to fend for herself in a world she barely remembered. Her body ached with exhaustion, but her resolve burned brighter than ever. She would protect her cubs, no matter what. As the first rays of dawn filtered through the trees, Bella rose quietly, careful not to disturb Ember and Frost. She ventured a few steps from the hollow, sniffing the air for signs of prey. Hunger gnawed at her, but the thought of her cubs gave her strength. She was a mother, and she would fight for them with every ounce of strength she had left. Her journey for survival had only just begun. The forest was quiet in the early morning light, save for the soft crunch of Bella's paws on the snow. Ember and Frost trailed behind her, their tiny footprints pressing lightly into the ground. Frost stumbled, his legs still too weak to keep up for long. Bella paused, nudging him gently with her nose, urging him onward. She had no choice but to keep moving. The shelter had left her with nothing, no safe haven, no food, and no guidance. Her instincts were all she had, and they told her that staying in one place for too long would only invite danger. The dense trees around her offered some cover, but they also concealed predators and other threats. The cubs were too small to understand the peril they were in. Ember nipped at Frost playfully, their young energy oblivious to their mother's worry. Bella's sharp ears swiveled at every sound, the rustle of branches, the distant call of a bird, the faint howl of the wind. She couldn't afford to let her guard down. The snow was deeper in parts of the forest, and the cubs struggled to keep their footing. Ember let out a small cry as she slipped into a shallow ditch, the snow swallowing her tiny frame. Bella was at her side in an instant, lifting her out with her teeth and setting her gently on solid ground. Frost huddled close, his wide eyes filled with fear. The morning passed in a slow, tense march. Bella kept her pace steady, though her own energy was dwindling. Her ribs pressed painfully against her thin coat, and the hunger in her stomach had grown into an ache that clouded her thoughts. She stopped briefly at the edge of a frozen creek, sniffing the air for any sign of prey. The water beneath the ice was silent and still, offering no hint of fish or other sustenance. Desperation gnawed at her. She needed to find food soon, or her cubs wouldn't survive another night. As the sun reached its peak, Bella caught the faint scent of a rabbit in the air. Her body tensed, her instincts taking over as she dropped low to the ground. She motioned for Ember and Frost to stay put with a soft growl, her eyes fixed on a patch of bushes ahead. The cubs huddled together, watching her intently. Bella moved silently through the snow, each step calculated and deliberate. Her eyes locked on the rabbit as it nibbled on a patch of grass peeking through the frost. She was close, just a few more steps. Her muscles coiled as she prepared to pounce, but a sudden crack in the distance broke the silence. The rabbit bolted, its white tail disappearing into the underbrush. Bella froze, her ears twitching as she scanned the forest. The sound had come from behind her, near where she had left the cubs. Her heart leapt as she turned and ran back to them. She found Ember and Frost trembling under a large pine tree, their eyes wide with fear. Bella sniffed the air, her sharp gaze darting through the trees. The scent of another animal lingered faintly, but whatever had caused the sound was gone now. She nuzzled her cubs, reassuring them with soft growls. They clung to her sides, their trust in her unshaken despite their fear. Bella's resolve hardened. She couldn't let her guard down again, not even for a moment. The day wore on, and the forest began to grow darker. Bella finally found a small hollow beneath a fallen tree that would serve as shelter for the night. It was cramped, but it was safe. She gathered moss and dry leaves to line the floor, creating a makeshift nest for Ember and Frost. They curled up together, their tiny bodies pressing into hers as she wrapped herself around them. The night was cold and still, the forest bathed in silvery moonlight. Bella stayed awake, her ears tuned to every sound. The ache in her stomach was unbearable now, but her cubs' soft breaths gave her strength. She licked Ember's head gently, her heart aching with a mixture of love and fear. She thought about the life they had left behind at the shelter. It hadn't been perfect, but it had been safer than this. She remembered the handlers who had once cared for her, who had fed her and tended to her injuries. She had trusted them, but they had cast her out when she needed them most. Bella's gaze shifted to her cubs, who were sleeping soundly despite the cold. They were her reason to keep fighting. The shelter might have given up on them, but she wouldn't. She was their mother, and she would do whatever it took to keep them alive. As the first light of dawn crept over the horizon, Bella rose quietly. Her body protested, every muscle aching from the cold and hunger, but she didn't hesitate. She nudged Ember and Frost awake, their soft mules breaking the morning silence. "Come," her body seemed to say as she led them out of the hollow. The forest awaited them, vast and unforgiving, but Bella's resolve was unshaken. She would keep moving, keep searching, and keep fighting. Their survival depended on it. The sun rose weakly over the forest, its pale light offering little warmth against the biting cold. Bella trudged onward, her body growing weaker with each passing hour. Ember and Frost followed close behind, their tiny steps faltering more often now. Frost let out a faint whimper as he stumbled, but Bella nudged him forward gently, her strength driven solely by the will to protect her cubs. The hunger was unbearable. Bella's sharp instincts told her she needed to find food soon, but prey was scarce in the snow-covered forest. She scanned the ground for tracks or signs of life, her ears twitching at every rustle in the underbrush. Yet each attempt to hunt had been met with failure, her energy drained before she could even pounce. As they moved deeper into the woods, Bella caught a faint, unfamiliar scent. It was sharp and metallic, mingled with the acrid tang of smoke. She froze, her body tense, and sniffed the air carefully. The scent was coming from the north, carried by the icy wind. It wasn't prey, but it was something. And at this point, anything was better than nothing. Bella hesitated, her instincts warning her against venturing too close to the source. Yet desperation outweighed caution. She turned toward the scent, motioning for Ember and Frost to follow. Their small paws crunched through the snow as they trailed behind her, their trust in their mother unshaken. The smell grew stronger as they neared the edge of a clearing. Bella crouched low, her sharp eyes scanning the area. What she saw made her pause. A campsite. A smoldering fire sat at the center, its embers glowing faintly in the snow. Beside it, a few scraps of food and a discarded tin can lay scattered near a tent. Bella's nose twitched as the scent of cooked meat reached her. Her stomach growled, the pangs of hunger sharpening her focus. She crept closer, her movements slow and deliberate. Ember and Frost stayed behind, watching her intently from the cover of the trees. The campsite appeared abandoned, but Bella knew better than to let her guard down. Humans had proven unpredictable, and she couldn't risk leading her cubs into danger. She circled the area cautiously, her ears swiveling to catch any sound of movement. Satisfied that no one was nearby, she approached the fire. The tin can was still warm to the touch, its contents partially spilled onto the snow. Bella sniffed it hesitantly, then licked the remnants of meat inside. It wasn't much, but it was enough to ease the gnawing hunger in her belly. She nudged the can toward the tree line, where Ember and Frost waited. Ember was the first to approach, her small nose twitching as she sniffed the can. Frost followed closely, his movements sluggish but determined. The cubs lapped at the meager scraps, their tiny bodies visibly relaxing as they ate. Bella stood guard, her eyes scanning the forest for any sign of the campsite's owner. A sudden noise, a twig snapping, sent a jolt through her. Bella's ears perked, her body tensing as she turned toward the sound. The smell of human was strong now, mingled with the metallic scent of the fire. She let out a low growl, stepping protectively in front of her cubs. A figure emerged from the trees, bundled in thick winter clothing. Alex, a wildlife photographer, froze in his tracks as he locked eyes with Bella. He had been out capturing the stark beauty of the snow-covered forest when he stumbled upon his campsite, only to find it occupied by a wild bobcat and her cubs. Bella's growl deepened, her sharp teeth bared as she lowered her body defensively. Alex raised his hands slowly, his movements deliberate. "Easy there," he said softly, his voice calm and steady. He had encountered wild animals before, but this was different. The bobcat wasn't just protecting herself, she was shielding her cubs. He took a cautious step forward, his eyes never leaving Bella. She snarled, her muscles coiling as if ready to pounce. Ember and Frost huddled behind her, their tiny bodies trembling with fear. Alex stopped, his heart pounding in his chest. He had no intention of harming them, but he also knew how dangerous a cornered animal could be. From his bag, Alex pulled out a small package of dried meat. He held it up, allowing Bella to see it before placing it carefully on the ground a few feet away. Then he stepped back, giving her space. Bella eyed him warily, her nostrils flaring as she sniffed the air. The scent of the meat was tempting, but she didn't move. "It's okay," Alex murmured, his voice barely above a whisper. "It's for you." Bella didn't trust him, but hunger eventually won over fear. She crept forward, her movements slow and deliberate, and sniffed the meat. After a moment, she picked it up in her jaws and retreated to her cubs. Alex watched in silence as she dropped the food in front of them, her eyes never leaving him. The cubs ate eagerly, their small tails twitching as they devoured the dried meat. Bella stood over them, her body a shield against the strange human. Alex stayed where he was, his breath visible in the cold air. He knew better than to make any sudden moves. As the cubs finished eating, Bella licked their faces, her sharp eyes flicking back to Alex. He took a step back, his hands still raised. "I'll leave you alone," he said softly, retreating toward his tent. He didn't know why, but he felt compelled to help them. Maybe it was the cubs' vulnerability or the raw determination in Bella's eyes. From a distance, Alex watched as Bella led her cubs away from the campsite, disappearing into the trees. His heart ached as he thought about their struggle. He couldn't just walk away, not after seeing them like this. Tomorrow, he decided, he would leave more food. For Bella, the encounter was a gamble. Humans had betrayed her before, but this one had shown kindness. Whether or not she could trust him, she didn't yet know. But for now, her cubs were fed, and that was all that mattered. The following morning, Bella awoke to the sound of Ember and Frost stirring beside her. The cubs stretched and yawned, their tiny bodies still weak but slightly more energetic after yesterday's meal. Bella nuzzled them gently before standing, her sharp eyes scanning the forest. She was hungry, as always, but her cubs' survival remained her priority. The memory of the human from the campsite lingered in her mind. She didn't trust him. Humans had let her down before, but his offering of food had been different. There had been no aggression, no traps, just a simple act of kindness. Bella's instincts warred with her desperation. She couldn't afford to rely on anyone but herself. Yet the thought of another easy meal tugged at her resolve. Gathering her cubs, Bella moved cautiously toward the campsite. The snow had stopped falling, but the forest was eerily quiet, the sound of their steps muffled by the thick blanket of white. Ember and Frost followed closely, their tiny paws sinking into the snow with each step. Bella paused frequently, her ears swiveling to catch any sound of danger. As they neared the campsite, Bella froze. The faint scent of human lingered, but it wasn't fresh. She crept closer, her body low to the ground, and peered through the underbrush. The campfire had burned out, leaving only a faint wisp of smoke curling into the cold air. A small pile of food sat neatly on the ground, the dried meat from before, now joined by a few strips of jerky and a can of tuna. Bella's stomach growled, but she didn't move. Her sharp eyes scanned the area for any sign of the man. The campsite appeared empty, but she knew better than to let her guard down. She motioned for Ember and Frost to stay back, their wide eyes watching her intently. Cautiously, Bella approached the food. She sniffed it thoroughly, her body tense and ready to spring at the first hint of danger. The meat smelled clean, with no trace of chemicals or poison. Satisfied it was safe, she grabbed a piece in her jaws and backed away quickly. Ember and Frost darted forward, their tiny tails wagging as Bella dropped the food in front of them. The cubs ate eagerly, their soft mewls of contentment breaking the silence of the forest. Bella kept her eyes on the surrounding trees, her body a coiled spring. She couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched, and she was. Alex stood a short distance away, hidden among the trees. He had returned to the campsite earlier that morning, hoping to see the Bobcat family again. His heart ached at their plight, and he couldn't bring himself to leave them without offering help. When he saw Bella emerge from the forest, her movements cautious and deliberate, he stayed still, not wanting to frighten her. From his hidden vantage point, Alex watched as Bella fed her cubs. He marveled at her strength and determination, her every move a testament to her love for them. The cubs were small, barely able to keep up with their mother, but their trust in her was absolute. Alex felt an overwhelming urge to do more, to ensure their survival in this harsh environment. Bella finished feeding her cubs and nudged them toward the safety of the trees. She turned back to the campsite, sniffing the air cautiously. The remaining food tempted her, but her instincts screamed that it was a trap. She circled the area, her sharp eyes scanning for any sign of danger. Alex held his breath as Bella approached the food again. She was so close, her movements graceful yet wary. For a moment, their eyes met through the branches. Bella froze, her body tense and ready to bolt. Alex stayed perfectly still, his hands raised slightly to show he meant no harm. "Easy," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "I'm not here to hurt you." Bella's ears twitched, her gaze locked on him. For a long moment, neither of them moved. Then, slowly, Bella backed away, grabbing the remaining food before disappearing into the trees with her cubs. Alex exhaled, his heart pounding in his chest. He had never been this close to a wild animal before. let alone one so protective and fierce. As Bella retreated into the forest, she couldn't shake the strange feeling the human had left her with. His voice had been calm, his actions deliberate, but not threatening. It was unlike anything she had experienced before. Humans had always been a source of danger, yet this one seemed different. For the next few days, Bella avoided the campsite, choosing instead to hunt for food in the deeper parts of the forest. Prey was scarce, and the cubs grew weaker with each passing day. Ember stumbled frequently, and Frost's cries were quieter now, his energy waning. Bella's heart ached as she watched her cubs struggle. She knew they wouldn't survive much longer without help. Finally, desperation drove her back to the campsite. The fire had been rebuilt, its warm glow a stark contrast to the cold, barren forest. Bella approached cautiously, her sharp eyes scanning for any sign of the man. To her surprise, he wasn't there, but another pile of food sat waiting near the fire. Alongside it was a bowl of fresh water. Bella sniffed the offerings, her body tense and ready to flee. The scent of human lingered, but it was faint. She grabbed the food and retreated to the trees, her cubs eagerly devouring the meal. As they ate, Bella kept her eyes on the campsite, her mind racing with questions. Why was this human helping them? What did he want in return? Bella didn't have the answers, but for now, her cubs were fed and safe. That was all that mattered. For Alex, it wasn't a question of why. It was simply the right thing to do. Watching Bella and her cubs from a distance, he made a silent vow. He would do everything in his power to help them survive. For Alex, each small step felt like a victory. He knew better than to push her too far, too fast. Trust, especially from a wild animal, wasn't something that could be rushed. He marveled at Bella's resilience, her every movement a testament to her will to survive. One crisp morning, as Alex tended to the fire, he noticed Bella lingering near the edge of the campsite. She wasn't just watching him, she was waiting. He felt a surge of hope as he reached for his pack, pulling out a piece of jerky. This time, instead of placing it on the ground, he held it out in his hand. Bella hesitated, her body tense. The cubs peeked out from behind her, their tiny faces curious. After what felt like an eternity, Bella stepped forward, her sharp eyes locked on Alex. She sniffed the air, her nose twitching as she assessed the offering. Then, with surprising delicacy, she took the jerky from his hand. Alex's heart swelled as Bella retreated, the cubs scampering after her. It was a small moment, but it marked a turning point. The fragile connection between them was growing stronger, built on patience, respect, and the unspoken understanding that they needed each other to survive. The days continued in a delicate balance of caution and trust between Bella and Alex. Each interaction brought them closer to a silent understanding. The harsh winter pressed on, but the Bobcat family was surviving, and for the first time in weeks, Bella wasn't entirely on her own. One morning, Alex emerged from his tent to find Bella sitting closer to the fire than ever before. Ember and Frost played near her, tumbling in the snow, their playful mews filling the air. Alex paused, unsure if his movement would startle her. Bella lifted her head, her piercing eyes locking onto his. There was no growl this time, only watchful curiosity. Alex slowly crouched near the fire, adding a few logs to the flames. He glanced at Bella, keeping his movements deliberate and calm. "Good morning," he said softly, though he knew she didn't understand. Still, speaking to her felt natural, as if it bridged the gap between them. The cubs noticed Alex and paused their play. Ember, braver than her sibling, padded toward him cautiously. Frost stayed behind, peeking out from behind Bella's legs. Alex smiled, holding out his hand to Ember, palm up, as he'd read about in wildlife guides. To his amazement, the cub sniffed his fingers before retreating back to Bella. Bella's ears twitched, but she didn't move. It was a small gesture, but it spoke volumes about her growing comfort with Alex. She wasn't ready to trust him fully, but she was beginning to see that he wasn't a threat. As the day wore on, Alex decided to build on the progress they had made. He rummaged through his supplies, finding a small rubber ball he had originally packed for his dog back home. The sight of it brought a pang of sadness. His old companion Max had passed away a year ago, leaving a void that Alex hadn't been able to fill. Perhaps, he thought, this could bring some joy to the cubs. He rolled the ball gently across the snow toward Ember and Frost. Ember immediately pounced on it, her tiny paws batting it playfully. Frost watched from a distance, his head tilting curiously. Bella remained still, her gaze shifting between Alex and her cubs. The game continued for a while, with Ember chasing the ball and Frost eventually joining in. Their laughter-like mews brought a smile to Alex's face. Bella, though still guarded, seemed to relax slightly, her body no longer as tense. That evening, as Alex sat by the fire, Bella approached the lean-to with her cubs. She settled down inside, curling protectively around them. Alex watched from a respectful distance, marveling at the sight. It was the closest she had ever come to his camp on her own. Over the next few days, Bella began to spend more time near the campsite. She still kept her distance, but her presence was steady, a sign that she was slowly accepting Alex's presence. The cubs, on the other hand, grew bolder with each passing day. They ventured closer to Alex, their curiosity outweighing their fear. One afternoon, as Alex prepared food for himself, Ember approached him. The cub sniffed the air, drawn by the smell of the stew he was cooking. Alex chuckled, setting aside a small piece of cooked meat. He placed it on the ground a few feet away, watching as Ember darted forward to snatch it before retreating. Frost, emboldened by his sister's actions, followed suit. The two cubs began to interact with Alex more freely, their playful antics bringing life to the quiet campsite. Bella observed from the edge of the clearing, her sharp eyes never leaving her cubs. It was during one of these moments that Alex noticed something troubling. Frost was lagging behind Ember, his steps slower and his playful energy diminished. The little cub's breathing seemed labored, and he stumbled more often than before. Alex's heart sank. He knew something was wrong. That evening, Alex sat by the fire, his mind racing. Frost needed help, but Bella would never let him get close enough to examine the cub. He thought about calling a wildlife rescue organization, but the risk of separating Bella from her cubs was too great. He had to find a way to help without breaking the fragile trust they had built. The next morning, Alex prepared a plan. He boiled water and gathered the limited medical supplies he had on hand, including a small bottle of electrolyte solution. When Bella and the cubs arrived at the campsite, he placed a bowl of water mixed with the solution near the fire, hoping Frost would drink it. Bella sniffed the bowl cautiously before allowing Frost to approach. The cub lapped at the water, his small body trembling. Alex watched with a mix of relief and anxiety. It wasn't a cure, but it was a start. As the days passed, Alex continued to monitor Frost closely. He left small portions of soft food mixed with vitamins and nutrients, ensuring the cub received extra care. Bella seemed to sense his intent, her growls less frequent as Alex worked quietly to help her cub. One evening, as the sun set behind the trees, Bella did something that stunned Alex. She approached him, not close enough to touch, but closer than she had ever dared. She looked at him, her amber eyes filled with something he couldn't quite identify. Gratitude? Trust? He didn't know, but it was a moment he would never forget. For Bella, the decision to let Alex help wasn't easy. She had learned to survive by relying on no one but herself. Yet, watching Frost grow stronger each day, she began to see Alex not as a threat, but as an ally. Her instincts still warned her to be cautious, but a small part of her wondered if this human was different. That night, as Bella and her cubs curled up in the lean-to, Alex sat by the fire, his heart full. The fragile bond they had formed was growing stronger, built on patience, care, and an unspoken understanding. For the first time in a long while, he felt a sense of purpose. Together, they were finding a way to survive. The forest grew colder with each passing day. The snow thickened, blanketing the ground in a quiet stillness that muffled sound and movement. Food became even scarcer, and the survival of Bella and her cubs depended more than ever on Alex's offerings. The bond between them, while still fragile, was undeniably growing. Bella no longer growled at Alex's presence, though her eyes remained watchful. She allowed her cubs to venture closer to him, their playful antics bringing small smiles to Alex's face. Frost was improving, his steps steadier, and his energy returning. The cub's recovery was a testament to Bella's determination and Alex's careful interventions. One particularly bitter morning, Alex woke to find the wind howling outside his tent. The fire he had carefully tended the night before had dwindled to glowing embers, barely holding on against the freezing air. As he stepped outside to rekindle it, he noticed movement near the lean-to. Bella was curled protectively around Ember and Frost, her breath forming small clouds in the icy air. Her fur, thick as it was dusted with frost, and her eyes flicked open as Alex approached the fire. She didn't move, but her ears twitched, tracking his every step. "Don't worry," Alex said softly, crouching to rebuild the fire. His hands were stiff from the cold as he struck the flint, but after a few tries, the flames roared back to life. The warmth spread quickly, and Alex sighed in relief. He glanced at Bella and noticed her staring, her amber eyes reflecting the flickering light. He pulled out his kettle and set it over the fire, preparing a warm broth for himself. From his pack, he retrieved a small bundle of meat and laid it on a flat stone near the fire, a safe distance from Bella. The cubs perked up at the scent, their tiny noses twitching as they crept toward the offering. Bella rose slowly, her body language cautious but calm. She sniffed the meat before nudging Ember and Frost forward. The cubs ate eagerly, their soft mewls breaking the stillness of the morning. Bella took a piece for herself, but kept her eyes on Alex, as if assessing his intentions. As they ate, Alex noticed something peculiar. Bella's movements were slower than usual, her steps heavier. She paused frequently, her breath coming in visible puffs even when she wasn't exerting herself. Concern gnawed at him. He had focused so much on helping Frost recover that he hadn't noticed Bella's own condition deteriorating. That evening, as Bella and the cubs rested in the lean-to, Alex prepared a plan. He sorted through his supplies, gathering everything he thought might help. Warm blankets, nutrient-rich food, and electrolyte solutions were carefully laid out. He knew Bella wouldn't let him approach her directly, but he could leave the items close enough for her to use. The next morning, Alex placed a blanket near the lean-to, weighing it down with a stone to keep it from blowing away. He added a bowl of warm water mixed with electrolytes and a generous portion of soft food. Bella eyed the setup suspiciously at first, but eventually approached, her steps hesitant. She sniffed the blanket and the food, her ears twitching at every sound. To Alex's relief, Bella lay down on the blanket, her cubs curling up beside her. The added warmth seemed to ease her discomfort, and Alex felt a small sense of victory. He knew it wasn't enough to solve her problems, but it was a start. Over the following days, Alex noticed subtle changes. Bella began to recover some of her strength, her steps less labored, and her fur regaining a faint sheen. The cubs, now more playful than ever, explored the campsite with boundless energy, their tiny paws leaving trails in the snow. Alex couldn't help but laugh as Ember tumbled into a snowdrift, her indignant squeal followed by Frost's amused chirps. Despite their progress, Alex knew their time together couldn't last forever. The forest was no place for them in the dead of winter, especially with food so scarce. He began to research wildlife rescue organizations and sanctuaries, hoping to find a solution that would ensure the family's safety without tearing them apart. One evening, Alex sat by the fire, his laptop perched on his knees. The faint glow of the screen illuminated his face as he scrolled through websites and forums, searching for advice. He found a wildlife sanctuary a few hours away that specialized in rehabilitating injured and orphaned animals. The sanctuary had sprawling enclosures that mimicked natural habitats, giving animals a chance to thrive while still being cared for. It seemed like the perfect place, but Alex hesitated. He knew Bella might never trust another human the way she was beginning to trust him. Could he convince her to accept help from strangers? And even if he did, would the sanctuary allow her to stay with her cubs? His thoughts were interrupted by a soft sound. Looking up, he saw Frost creeping closer to him, his wide eyes reflecting the firelight. The cub sniffed at Alex's boots before retreating, his tiny tail flicking nervously. Alex smiled, his heart swelling at the gesture. Bella watched the interaction from her spot near the lean-to. Her sharp eyes narrowed slightly, but she didn't intervene. It was another small step forward, another sign that the fragile trust between them was holding. As the fire crackled and the stars emerged in the night sky, Alex leaned back and sighed. The journey wasn't over, but for the first time, he felt a glimmer of hope. Together, they had come this far, and he was determined to see them through the winter, no matter what it took. The winter deepened, and the forest became an unrelenting expanse of white. The air was sharper, the nights colder, and survival grew more challenging with each passing day. Bella and her cubs had adjusted to life near Alex's campsite, but the limits of their endurance were becoming evident. Even with Alex's help, Bella was visibly thinner, her movements slower, and her eyes carried a weariness that no amount of rest could erase. Alex knew it was time to make a difficult decision. As much as he wanted to continue caring for Bella and her cubs, the forest was no longer a safe place for them. They needed stability, medical attention, and resources that he simply couldn't provide. The sanctuary he had discovered seemed like the only solution, but convincing Bella to leave was another matter entirely. One morning, as the sun struggled to pierce through the heavy clouds, Alex sat by the fire, turning the idea over in his mind. Bella and the cubs were nearby, with Ember and Frost tumbling through the snow, their playful mews occasionally drawing Bella's attention. She lay watchfully, her tail curled protectively around her small frame. Alex decided to try something new. He approached the lean-to slowly, carrying a wooden crate lined with blankets. He placed it a short distance from Bella and backed away, sitting by the fire to give her space. The crate was meant to mimic the transport enclosures he had seen on the sanctuary's website. If Bella could grow comfortable with it, moving her and the cubs safely might be possible. Bella sniffed the air, her sharp eyes narrowing at the unfamiliar object. She crept closer, her ears flat and her body low to the ground. Ember and Frost followed curiously, their tiny tails flicking as they approached the crate. Bella sniffed the blankets, her muscles tense, but she didn't retreat. Alex watched quietly, his heart pounding. He knew this was a delicate moment, one that could determine the success of his plan. Bella turned her head to look at him, her amber eyes filled with suspicion, but also a flicker of understanding. After a long moment, she stepped back, nudging her cubs toward the crate. Ember clambered inside first, her small body disappearing into the soft folds of the blanket. Frost hesitated, glancing at his mother before following his sister. Bella stayed outside the crate, her body still coiled with tension. Alex exhaled slowly, trying to project calm. "It's okay," he said softly, though he doubted she understood. "This is for you, for them." The next few days were a delicate dance. Alex left food near the crate, encouraging Bella to associate it with safety. He also contacted the sanctuary, explaining Bella's situation in detail. The staff were hesitant at first, concerned about the risks of relocating a wild animal, but Alex's persistence won them over. They agreed to prepare a space for Bella and her cubs, provided he could safely transport them. Alex's preparations intensified. He reinforced the crate, ensuring it was secure but not confining. He also began spending more time near Bella, hoping to build enough trust for her to allow him to help. Each interaction was a test of patience, but Alex knew it was the only way. One evening, as Alex sat by the fire, Bella did something unexpected. She approached him, not with the cautious distance she usually maintained, but with deliberate steps. Ember and Frost were nestled in the crate, their soft breaths visible in the cold air. Bella stopped a few feet from Alex, her sharp eyes meeting his. Alex stayed perfectly still, his heart pounding. Bella's gaze was piercing, filled with an intensity he couldn't quite decipher. For a moment, it felt as though she was evaluating him, weighing the trust she had cautiously extended over the past weeks. Then, slowly, she sat down, her body relaxed but her eyes never leaving his. The gesture filled Alex with a mix of awe and gratitude. He didn't dare move, afraid of breaking the fragile connection. "You're incredible," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "You've done so much for them. Let me help you now." Bella didn't react, but she didn't leave either. The fire crackled between them, its warmth a small comfort against the biting cold. For Alex, the moment felt like a turning point. Bella wasn't just tolerating his presence anymore. She was beginning to accept it. The next morning, Alex decided it was time to act. He loaded his truck with supplies, carefully padding the back seat with blankets and securing the crate in place. Bella watched him work, her sharp eyes following his every move. Ember and Frost were playful as ever, their energy a stark contrast to Bella's quiet vigilance. When it was time to leave, Alex approached Bella cautiously. He opened the crate's door and stepped back, giving her the choice to enter. Ember and Frost were already inside, their tiny bodies nestled together. Bella hesitated, her body tense, but the sight of her cubs seemed to steady her. She stepped into the crate, her movements slow but deliberate. Alex closed the door gently, his hands trembling slightly. He had spent weeks earning her trust, and now he was asking her to give up the only home she knew. It was a risk, but one he hoped would lead to a better future. The drive to the sanctuary was quiet, the hum of the truck the only sound. Alex glanced in the rearview mirror frequently, checking on Bella and the cubs. They were calm, though Bella's sharp eyes never left him. She didn't trust the journey, but she had placed her faith in Alex, for now. When they arrived at the sanctuary, Alex was greeted by a team of staff who immediately took over. Bella growled softly as they approached, her protective instincts flaring. Alex stepped in, his calm voice soothing her. "It's okay," he said. "These people are here to help." The staff worked quickly, transferring the crates to a large enclosure that mimicked a natural habitat. It was spacious, with plenty of room for Bella and her cubs to explore. Once inside, Bella stepped out cautiously, her cubs following close behind. She sniffed the air, her sharp eyes scanning her surroundings. Alex stood by the gate, watching silently. A wave of relief washed over him as he saw Bella relax slightly, her body no longer coiled with tension. Ember and Frost began exploring, their tiny tails wagging as they tumbled through the grass. As Alex turned to leave, he felt a pang of sadness. He had grown attached to Bella and her cubs, their quiet resilience inspiring him in ways he hadn't expected. But this was the right choice. They had a chance now, a real chance to thrive. "Take care of them," Alex whispered, his voice barely audible over the wind. With one last look at the Bobcat family, he walked away, his heart full of hope for the road ahead. The sanctuary became a strange but welcome new home for Bella and her cubs. The sprawling enclosure mimicked the wild forest they had left behind, but it offered safety and abundance they had never known. For the first time in weeks, Bella didn't have to constantly scan the horizon for danger. Food was plentiful, water was always available, and there were no predators to fear. Ember and Frost adapted quickly to the new environment. The cubs explored every corner of the enclosure with unbridled curiosity, their playful antics filling the air with soft mewls and chirps. Bella, however, remained cautious. She kept a close eye on the sanctuary staff, her sharp eyes narrowing at their every movement. Trusting Alex had been hard enough. These new humans were an entirely different challenge. From behind a one-way glass panel, Alex stood watching Bella and her cubs. He had stayed at the sanctuary for a few days to ensure their transition was smooth. The staff had been understanding, allowing him to observe quietly while they tended to the family. Bella's cautious demeanor didn't surprise him. He had come to respect her unyielding protectiveness. "She's doing well," one of the staff members said, joining Alex at the panel. Her name was Dr. Hayes, a wildlife specialist with decades of experience. "It'll take time, but she'll adjust. The cubs are thriving already." Alex nodded, his eyes never leaving Bella. "She's been through a lot. It's hard to imagine she'd ever feel safe again." Dr. Hayes offered a reassuring smile. "Animals are more resilient than we think. She just needs to see that we're not a threat. You've given her a head start by building that trust." Inside the enclosure, Bella settled under a tree, her cubs tumbling over each other in the grass. Alex's heart swelled at the sight. They were safe, and for the first time, he allowed himself to believe they had a future. Before leaving the sanctuary, Alex made sure to leave detailed notes about Bella and her cubs. He shared everything he had learned, their behaviors, their needs, and the subtle signs Bella gave when she was anxious or calm. The staff listened attentively, promising to care for the family as if they were their own. Saying goodbye was harder than Alex anticipated. On his final morning at the sanctuary, he approached the enclosure one last time. Bella was lying in the shade, her cubs playing nearby. She noticed him immediately, her sharp eyes locking onto his. For a moment, Alex wondered if she recognized him. "Hey, Bella," he said softly, his voice thick with emotion. "You've got a good place here. They'll take care of you." Bella didn't move, but her gaze didn't waver. Alex smiled faintly, choosing to believe that she understood. He stepped back from the glass, knowing it was time to let go. The drive home was quiet, the road stretching endlessly before him. Alex's mind replayed the moments he had shared with Bella and her cubs, their first encounter, the cautious trust they had built, and the small victories that had brought them to safety. Despite the ache of parting, he felt a profound sense of fulfillment. Back in his cabin, the forest seemed quieter without the Bobcat family nearby. The lean-to was empty, the fire pit cold. Yet, Alex didn't feel alone. Bella and her cubs had left a mark on his life, one that would never fade. They had reminded him of the importance of patience, kindness, and the quiet strength found in the most unexpected places. Weeks turned into months, and Alex kept in touch with the sanctuary. Dr. Hayes sent regular updates, sharing photos of Ember and Frost as they grew stronger and more independent. Bella, too, was thriving. She had adapted to her new environment, her sharp eyes softer now, her movements less tense. The bond between her and her cubs remained unshakable, a testament to her unwavering love. One day, Alex received an email from the sanctuary with a subject line that read, "A special update. He opened it eagerly, his heart racing. Inside was a photo of Bella standing proudly in the enclosure, her cubs at her side. They had grown considerably, their once small frames now lean and strong. The accompanying message explained that Ember and Frost were nearing the age where they could be released into a larger, semi-wild area of the sanctuary to prepare for eventual reintroduction to the wild. Alex stared at the photo for a long time, a mix of pride and sadness washing over him. Bella had done her job. She had raised her cubs, protected them, and ensured their survival. And in a small way, he had been part of that journey. That evening, Alex lit a fire in the cabin's hearth and sat by the warmth, a quiet smile on his face. The forest outside was silent, the stars bright against the inky sky. Somewhere out there, Bella and her cubs were living the life they deserved, a life of freedom, safety, and hope. And for Alex, that was enough. Spring had arrived, breathing life back into the forest that once seemed so desolate. The snow had melted, replaced by vibrant greens and the sounds of birdsong. For Alex, the change in season mirrored his own journey, one of renewal and hope. Though Bella and her cubs were no longer nearby, their presence lingered in his heart, a constant reminder of the bond they had shared. One sunny afternoon, Alex received an unexpected call from Dr. Hayes at the sanctuary. Her voice carried a note of excitement. "Alex, we thought you'd want to know. Bella and her cubs have made incredible progress. Ember and Frost are thriving in the semi-wild area, and Bella, well, she's become the heart of the sanctuary." Alex's chest swelled with pride. The heart of the sanctuary? Yes, Dr. Hayes continued. She's shown remarkable leadership qualities, even among other rescued bobcats. She's teaching her cubs, and others, how to navigate their environment. It's like she knows she's been given a second chance and wants to make the most of it. Alex smiled, a warmth spreading through him. "That's Bella for you. She's always been a fighter." "There's more," Dr. Hayes added. "We've been documenting their progress, and we'd love for you to visit. It feels like a celebration of how far they've come, and how far you helped them get." The invitation caught Alex off guard. He had thought his role in Bella's story was over, but the idea of seeing her again, of witnessing firsthand the life she had built for her family, was too tempting to pass up. "I'd love to," he said, his voice steady despite the emotions welling inside him. A week later, Alex found himself driving back to the sanctuary. The winding road felt familiar, but this time, his journey was filled with anticipation rather than worry. When he arrived, Dr. Hayes greeted him warmly, her enthusiasm infectious. "They're waiting for you," she said, leading him toward the expansive enclosure. As they approached, Alex's heart pounded. The enclosure was even more impressive than he remembered, a vast expanse of forest and rocky terrain designed to mimic the bobcat's natural habitat. It was a place of freedom, safety, and growth, a sanctuary in every sense of the word. Through the trees, Alex caught his first glimpse of Bella. She was perched on a large rock, her amber eyes scanning the area with a quiet intensity. Ember and Frost were nearby, their sleek bodies moving with the grace and confidence of young adults. They had grown so much, their once small frames now strong and capable. Bella turned her head, and for a brief moment their eyes met. Alex froze, a lump forming in his throat. Did she remember him? Did she know how much she had meant to him? He didn't expect answers, but the connection he felt in that instant was undeniable. "She's watching you," Dr. Hayes said softly. "I think she knows." Alex stood silently, taking it all in. The cubs played nearby, their antics a testament to their health and happiness. Bella remained poised, her presence commanding yet serene. She was a survivor, a protector, and now a leader. Dr. Hayes broke the silence. "We wanted to thank you, Alex. What you did for Bella and her cubs, it's not something we see every day. You gave them a chance when no one else would, and it's made all the difference." Alex nodded, his voice thick with emotion. "I think they gave me just as much as I gave them, maybe more." The visit was brief, but it left an indelible mark on Alex. As he drove away from the sanctuary, he felt a profound sense of closure. Bella and her cubs were thriving, their lives a testament to resilience and hope. And though their paths had diverged, he knew they would always be connected. Back at his cabin, Alex resumed his quiet life, but the forest felt different now. It wasn't just a backdrop to his solitude. It was a reminder of the bond he had shared with Bella and her cubs. He often found himself looking toward the trees, imagining them moving through the wild with strength and grace. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Alex stepped outside and gazed at the star-filled sky. A soft breeze rustled the leaves, carrying with it a sense of peace. He thought of Bella, her cubs, and the journey they had taken together. "Thank you," he whispered, his words carried into the night.